In the cold expanse of the galaxy, there exists a barren world, scarred by centuries of resource depletion. The landscape is a wasteland of jagged rocks and withered plants, a place where life clings desperately to survival. The inhabitants of this world, a resilient alien species, have developed strict societal norms, born out of necessity. Resources are limited, and anything or anyone deemed unproductive is considered a burden. In this society, strength and utility are prized above all, and those who fall short are abandoned, left to fend for themselves in the unforgiving wilderness. Among these discarded souls is a mother, her heart heavy with sorrow as she cradles her only child. The daughter, born with a rare genetic disorder, has always been frail, her body unable to endure the harshness of their world. The disorder twisted her limbs and weakened her muscles, rendering her incapable of contributing to their society's relentless demands. For years, the mother fought against the whispers and the cold stares, shielding her daughter from the cruel judgments of their community. But love alone could not protect them from the harsh reality of their world. The day came when the elders of the community decided that the mother and her daughter were no longer worth the meager resources they consumed. In a ceremony devoid of emotion, they were cast out, left to wander the desolate plains with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The mother's heart shattered as she held her daughter close, the child's wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. The community turned their backs on them, walking away without a second thought, their footsteps fading into the distance. The wilderness was an unforgiving place, a vast expanse of cracked earth and jagged rocks, where the winds howled like lost souls. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, and the nights were filled with the chilling cries of unseen predators. The mother struggled to keep her daughter alive, foraging for whatever scraps of food she could find. Her hands, once soft and gentle, became calloused and torn from digging through the hard soil in search of water. She fashioned a crude shelter from fallen branches and tattered cloth, but it was barely enough to keep the biting cold at bay. Each day was a battle against despair. The mother watched helplessly as her daughter's condition worsened, her once bright eyes now dull and distant. The child rarely spoke, her voice reduced to a faint whisper. The mother held her close every night, whispering words of comfort, even as her own heart was filled with fear. She could feel the life slipping away from her daughter, and with it, her own strength to carry on. But she refused to give up, not while her daughter still breathed. As hope began to wane, a figure appeared on the horizon, a lone traveler making his way through the desolate land. He was human, a rarity in this part of the galaxy, and he walked with a purpose, his eyes scanning the landscape as if searching for something. His clothes were worn, and his face bore the marks of countless days spent under the harsh sun. He was an engineer, exiled from his own colony for defying their rigid laws and choosing compassion over conformity. The traveler had wandered for weeks, guided only by a faint hope that he might find a place where kindness still existed. His journey had taken him through barren lands and treacherous terrains, but he pressed on, driven by a need to prove that even in the darkest places, light could still be found. It was during one of these endless days that he spotted movement in the distance, a flicker of life amidst the lifeless land. As he approached, he saw the makeshift shelter and the two figures huddled inside. The sight of the frail child, her body weak and emaciated, stirred something deep within him. He recognized the signs of a society that had lost its way, a place where the weak were discarded and forgotten. He had seen it before, in his own world, and it was what had driven him to leave. Without hesitation, he approached the mother, who looked up at him with a mixture of fear and desperation. He knelt beside the child, his trained eyes assessing her condition. It was worse than he had imagined, but not beyond hope. He spoke softly to the mother, his voice calm and reassuring, explaining that he could help. The mother, though wary, saw the sincerity in his eyes and nodded, her last shred of hope resting in this stranger's hands. The traveler wasted no time, his hands moving with practiced precision as he began to assemble a makeshift life support system. He used whatever scraps and pieces he had collected on his journey, repurposing them into a device that could stabilize the child's fragile body. The mother watched in awe as the machine hummed to life, its soft glow illuminating the dark interior of the shelter. The child's breathing steadied, and for the first time in days, her eyes fluttered open with a spark of life. The mother's tears flowed freely as she cradled her daughter, gratitude filling her heart. The traveler stayed with them, teaching the mother survival techniques that would help them endure the harsh conditions. He showed her how to purify water, how to find edible plants, and how to defend themselves from the dangers that lurked in the wilderness. Together, they built a small haven amidst the desolation, a place where they could survive, and perhaps even thrive. The mother's strength grew as she learned from the traveler, her determination to protect her daughter rekindled. The traveler, too, found a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going in a world that had seemed so devoid of hope. The three of them, bound by fate and circumstance, formed an unlikely family, each finding in the others the strength to face the challenges ahead. The wilderness, once a place of despair, became a refuge where they could live in peace, if only for a time. The human traveler, weathered from his long journey, couldn't believe his eyes when he first stumbled upon the alien mother and her daughter. The sight was haunting, a frail, emaciated child lying motionless in her mother's arms, her breathing shallow and labored. The mother herself was gaunt, her eyes hollowed by exhaustion and fear. She clung to her child with a protective desperation, her entire being focused on keeping her daughter alive against impossible odds. As the human approached, the mother recoiled, her body tense with fear. In her world, strangers were often threats, and this human was no different in her eyes. She didn't trust him, didn't know what he wanted or if he would take her daughter away. But the human's face was etched with concern, not malice. He spoke softly, his voice a soothing contrast to the harshness of their surroundings. He kept his distance at first, moving slowly, showing that he meant no harm. Over time, his patience and gentle demeanor began to erode the walls of fear she had built around herself. Her instincts told her to trust him, though she couldn't explain why. And in her heart, she knew she had no other choice. The traveler's initial shock gave way to a focused determination as he assessed the situation. It didn't take long for him to realize that the child's condition was critical. Her breaths were too shallow, her pulse too weak. Without intervention, she wouldn't survive much longer. He knew he had to act fast. Drawing on his skills as an engineer, he began rummaging through his pack, pulling out bits of salvage technology and spare parts he had collected over the years. His hands moved quickly, but with precision, as he assembled a rudimentary life support system, a device that would help the child breathe more easily and stabilize her condition. The mother watched in anxious silence as he worked, her eyes flickering between the human and her daughter, hope and fear warring within her. She had no idea what he was doing, but she could see the urgency in his actions and the care in his movements. When the device finally whirred to life, its soft hum filling the air, the mother held her breath. The human gently placed the device near the child, adjusting it until her breathing began to steady. The change was almost immediate. Color slowly returned to the child's cheeks, and her breathing became more regular. The mother's eyes filled with tears, her overwhelming relief breaking through the fear that had gripped her for so long. She looked at the human, her heart swelling with gratitude she couldn't put into words. As the days passed, the human didn't leave. He knew that saving the child's life was only the first step. They were still in the middle of a hostile environment, and survival required more than just a life support system. He began teaching the mother essential survival techniques, starting with the basics: how to find and purify water, how to forage for edible plants, and how to create simple tools from the materials around them. The mother, driven by her love for her daughter and her newfound hope, absorbed everything he taught her. Her hands, once weak and trembling, grew stronger and more confident as she worked alongside the human. Together, they foraged and hunted, their efforts slowly transforming the barren land around them into a small, sustainable sanctuary. Building a shelter was their next challenge. The human showed the mother how to use the surrounding materials, fallen branches, stones, and the tattered remnants of their clothes, to construct a sturdy, weather-resistant structure. They worked together, their efforts synchronized as if they had been a team for much longer than the few days they had known each other. The shelter, though simple, was a testament to their resilience and cooperation. It provided them with a safe haven, a place where the mother and daughter could finally rest without fear. As time went on, the bond between the three of them grew stronger. The mother no longer saw the human as a stranger but as a protector, a friend, someone who had given her and her daughter a second chance at life. The child, too, began to respond to the human's presence, her eyes brightening whenever he was near. There were moments of quiet connection, shared meals by the fire, the human teaching the child simple games to lift her spirits, the mother and human exchanging looks of understanding and unspoken gratitude. The human, once a solitary traveler, found himself becoming a part of their small family. He had set out on his journey alone, but here, in the most unlikely of places, he had found something he didn't know he was looking for, a sense of belonging, a purpose beyond his own survival. In this desolate wilderness, where hope had once seemed impossible, they had created a new life together. The human, the mother, and the daughter, each had been lost in their own way, but together, they had found a way to survive. And in their unity, they discovered that even in the harshest conditions, there was still room for kindness, for love, and for the possibility of a better tomorrow. The human, with his resourcefulness, set about transforming their barren surroundings into a livable environment. He started by constructing a simple yet effective water collection system, using the remnants of metal and fabric he had scavenged. It captured the scarce rainfall, filtering it through layers of sand and charcoal he had gathered, providing them with a clean and steady water supply. The mother watched in awe as the human's ingenuity brought life to the dry landscape. Together, they began planting seeds he had carried with him, starting a small garden that would provide them with food in the coming months. The garden was modest, but in this harsh world, it was a symbol of hope. The human also fashioned basic tools for hunting and gathering, teaching the mother how to use them. They built traps and snares, collected edible plants, and slowly but surely, their small sanctuary began to take shape. The daughter, once teetering on the brink of death, started to show signs of improvement. The life support system the human had created allowed her to breathe more easily, and the nutritious food from their garden and foraging gave her strength. Day by day, she grew stronger, her limbs no longer as frail, her skin regaining some of its color. The mother noticed the spark returning to her daughter's eyes, a light she feared had been extinguished forever. The child began to smile more often, her laughter, though still faint, was a sound that filled the mother's heart with joy. She started to explore their small world, taking tentative steps outside the shelter, her curiosity slowly overcoming her fear. The mother marveled at her daughter's resilience, realizing that the impossible was happening. Her daughter was beginning to thrive. The human's presence had become more than just a lifeline. It was a source of profound change. The mother, once filled with despair, now found herself looking to the future with a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. The human's quiet strength and unyielding kindness were infectious. He showed her that survival wasn't just about scraping by, but about finding ways to live, to find joy, even in the smallest things. Her outlook on life began to shift, her resolve to protect and nurture her daughter growing stronger with each passing day. She no longer saw their situation as hopeless, but as a challenge to overcome. The human had given her something she hadn't dared to hope for: resilience. One day, as the human was exploring the surrounding area, he stumbled upon something unexpected, an old, weathered structure partially buried in the earth. It was small, almost completely camouflaged by the rocky terrain, but unmistakably man-made. Inside, he found remnants of what appeared to be a long-abandoned outpost. Among the debris, there were signs of technology that, if restored, could potentially improve their situation even further. The discovery was a revelation, a sign that they were not as isolated as they had believed. It hinted at the possibility of nearby civilization or resources they could tap into. The human returned to the mother with this newfound hope, sharing with her the idea that perhaps, one day, they could return to her community, not as outcasts, but as survivors who had defied the odds. The idea was like a seed planted in the mother's heart, one that began to grow alongside her determination. For the first time, they could see a future beyond mere survival, a future where they might reclaim their place in the world. The decision to return to the alien community was not made lightly. The mother knew the risks. Returning meant facing the same people who had cast her and her daughter out to die. But now, armed with the strength and knowledge they had gained, she was determined to confront the community that had wronged them. The humans supported her decision, understanding that this journey was as much about reclaiming their dignity as it was about survival. Together, they prepared meticulously for the journey. The human reinforced the life support system to ensure it would last the trip, and they gathered enough provisions to sustain them through the harsh terrain. The daughter, though still weak, was eager to return, sensing the importance of the journey. The physical challenges were grueling. The rocky landscape seemed even more unforgiving on their return, the cold nights and scorching days testing their resolve. But it was the emotional burden that weighed heaviest on the mother, the fear of rejection and the possibility that all their efforts might be for nothing. When they finally arrived at the outskirts of the community, the tension was palpable. The mother, the human, and the daughter stood together, their presence immediately drawing the attention of the villagers. The community's initial reaction was one of shock and disbelief. How could the weak and frail child they had abandoned still be alive? Whispers spread like wildfire, and soon, a crowd gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity, fear, and hostility. The elders, the very ones who had sentenced them to death, stepped forward, their faces hard and unforgiving. The mother, her heart pounding in her chest, stepped forward as well, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She confronted them, recounting the pain of their abandonment, the suffering she and her daughter endured, and the miracle of their survival. Her words were a raw, powerful testament to their resilience, and for a moment the crowd was silent. The human stood by her side, a silent but undeniable presence, his eyes meeting those of the elders, challenging their authority. The confrontation planted seeds of doubt within the community. The human's intervention, his knowledge and compassion, were something they had not expected, and it began to challenge their long-held beliefs. The mother's unwavering love for her daughter, her strength in the face of overwhelming odds, was a stark contrast to the cold, calculating logic that had led to their exile. Slowly, whispers of dissent began to rise among the crowd, members of the community starting to question the morality of their actions. Could it be that they had been wrong? That their strict adherence to survival had blinded them to the value of compassion and humanity? The turning point came when one of the elders, an older woman who had lost a child of her own years before, stepped forward. She looked at the mother and her daughter, then at the human, and finally spoke, a simple acknowledgement of their courage and strength. Her words broke the tension, and others began to murmur in agreement. The community's rigid walls of prejudice and fear began to crack. In the days that followed, change began to take root within the community. The mother and daughter were accepted back, not as burdens, but as symbols of resilience and hope. The human's influence, his willingness to help those who had been cast aside, inspired others to rethink their views on the weak and the disabled. The community started to change, slowly but surely, recognizing that survival was not just about strength, but also about compassion and unity. The mother, once a pariah, became a voice for those who could not speak for themselves, advocating for a more inclusive society. As the community began to rebuild itself, the human prepared to continue his journey, knowing that his work here was done. But he left behind something far more valuable than technology or knowledge. He left behind a spark of hope, a belief that even in the harshest of worlds, change was possible. The mother and daughter watched as the human departed, their hearts full of gratitude and a newfound sense of purpose. They were no longer alone, no longer outcasts. They were part of a community that was beginning to understand the true meaning of strength, not just in muscle or survival, but in compassion, resilience, and the ability to change. The future was uncertain, but it was filled with possibilities they had never dared to dream of before. And as they stood at the edge of the village, watching the sun rise over the desolate landscape, they knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter filled with hope, acceptance, and the promise of a better tomorrow.